They never saw the way he used to sit alone in a dimly lit room surrounded by his own thoughts, like they were walls closing in on him. Slowly and silently, every night he would check his phone one last time. Not because he was expecting anything, but because some small, fragile part of him still hoped that maybe this time someone would care, someone would ask if he was doing all right, someone would show up for him the way he always showed up for everyone else. But that message never came, and so he learned how to be okay with the silence, even when it screamed louder than anything else in the world. And that's the kind of man he became, someone who learned to breathe underwater without ever learning how to swim. He was never loved, right? Not by the people who were supposed to love him, not by the ones who promised to never leave, not by the ones who looked him in the eye and said they cared, only to disappear when he needed them most. He wasn't held when he broke, he wasn't heard when he spoke. He wasn't seen when he stood in front of them, breaking slowly with a smile stretched across his face like a mask, and because they couldn't see his pain, they believed he didn't have any, and that spurred where they were wrong, because the strongest people aren't the ones who talk the most, they're the ones who survive in silence. He stopped explaining himself, he stopped pouring his soul into people who treated his heart like it was temporary. He stopped expecting love to come from the places he used to call home, and instead he began to build a place within himself where he didn't need to be understood or fixed or saved. He became his own shelter. He became his own anchor, and for the first time in his life he realized that maybe he wasn't unlovable, maybe he was just giving his love to people who didn't know what to do with something so real. He cried alone and healed alone and woke up to his own pain without blaming the world, because deep down he knew no one was coming, and that realization didn't destroy him, it liberated him, because it gave him permission to stop waiting for love that would never arrive and start building the kind of strength that no one could ever take from him again. He didn't want to be invincible, he just wanted to be free, free from the ache of being half-loved, free from the emptiness of being forgotten, free from the trap of needing someone to pick him every time he went silent, not out of weakness, but because he was tired of explaining the weight he carried to people who only knew how to judge. He walked away from conversations that left him drained. He stopped arguing for his worth. He stopped showing up in places where he had to shrink to be accepted, and in that quiet rebellion, he found power, the kind of power that doesn't need to be loud or recognized. It just is calm, steady, unshakable. There was a time when he would have done anything just to feel seen, but now he's the man who walks into a room and no longer hopes to be noticed, because he's not performing anymore. He's not trying to be chosen anymore. He is enough as he is, and if they can't see that it's no longer his burden to carry, he learned to keep his energy where it's valued, his loyalty where it's earned, and his love where it's respected. He stopped texting first, stopped overthinking. His silence stopped apologizing for being quiet or distant, because he realized he was not cold, he was careful, he was not heartless, he was healing. And healing sometimes looks like solitude, it looks like disappearing, it looks like putting up walls, not to keep people out, but to see who is willing to climb them with gentleness and understanding. There were nights he couldn't sleep, not because of the pain, but because of the memories of how deeply he loved people who never even tried to love him back. And those memories didn't break him anymore, they built him, they reminded him of his own capacity to care, and that became his superpower, because even after everything he had every reason to turn bitter, to shut down, to numb himself. But he didn't. He chose to rise, and rising didn't mean revenge. It meant discipline. It meant inner peace. It meant becoming someone who no longer craves the validation of those who misused his loyalty. He looked at himself one day in the mirror, and for the first time, he didn't see someone who wasn't enough. He saw a man who had survived himself, who had carried his broken heart through storms and still managed to keep it beating. He saw the boy inside, who once begged to be loved, and the man now who no longer begs for anything from anyone because he gives himself everything he needs: love, safety, peace, direction, purpose. And that's what growth looks like. Not perfection, but peace with the parts of you that no one clapped for. Built habits in silence, healed old wounds without announcing them, started working out not to impress but to strengthen, started reading not to escape but to rebuild his mind, started setting goals that were no longer about proving anyone wrong but proving himself right. And with each passing day, the boy who once felt unworthy faded, and the man who rose from rejection stood taller, not with pride but with grace, the kind that only comes from walking through fire and refusing to be burned. He became quiet, not because he had nothing to say, but because he realized not everyone deserves to hear your story. Some people only want to listen long enough to find your weakness so they can use it against you. And so he protected his energy. Like treasure, he guarded his heart, not out of fear, but out of wisdom, because not everyone who knocks at your door is meant to be let in. He taught himself how to live without the love he never received. He found beauty in solitude, learned to dance with his shadows, sat at his own table, and learned to be full without needing someone to feed him. Validation, he turned pain into purpose, and wounds into wisdom. And though he still had moments where loneliness whispered to him, he no longer ran from it. He sat with it, and in that stillness, he discovered the difference between being lonely and being alone. The man he is now is not heartless. He just chooses where his heart beats the loudest. He is not emotionless. He just no longer allows his emotions to drown him. He still loves, but it's quieter now, softer, deeper. He no longer gives to be kept. He gives because he's overflowing. And that's the kind of man the world underestimates, because he doesn't look like the storm, but he is the eye of it, calm, powerful, centered, untouchable. He doesn't chase, he attracts. He doesn't beg, he creates. He doesn't explain, he executes. He doesn't get even, he elevates. And that's what makes him dangerous. Not his fists, not his words, but the way he carries himself through pain with grace, and through silence with strength. And the people who once made him feel small, who once took his kindness as weakness, who once walked away like he was nothing, now watch him from a distance and feel that silence burn louder than any words he could have ever said, because he didn't need to prove his worth with noise. His presence now speaks volumes. This man, this version of him, is the result of every night he cried alone, every time he felt invisible, every betrayal he didn't deserve, every promise that turned into silence, every goodbye that came without explanation, and every day he chose to keep going when no one believed he would. So when they ask him why he's so distant, why he doesn't open up, why he doesn't trust so easily anymore, he smiles, not with arrogance, but with understanding, because they wouldn't survive what he walked through. They wouldn't recognize the kind of battle he fought just to stand here whole and unbothered. Was never loved right, so he taught himself how to live without it, and in doing so, he became the kind of man no one can ever break again, because he no longer needs what once destroyed him. And that's not just healing, that's power.